Night had fallen relentlessly over Ridgeway Memorial Hospital. In the dimly lit room 304, 10-year-old Noah Sullivan lay motionless in his hospital bed, his frail body struggling against an unseen force. The monotonous beeping of the heart monitor echoed in the silent room, each weak pulse a fading whisper of life. His parents, Emma and Daniel, sat on either side of him, their faces pale and streaked with silent tears. Emma's hands trembled as she stroked Noah's small, cold fingers, her breath shaky. She had spent every waking moment by his bedside, fearing that if she let go, he might slip away forever. Doctors had done everything they could. Noah's heart was failing, and there was nothing left but time, a cruel, unpredictable force slipping through their fingers. Outside the hospital, just beyond the glass walls of the children's wing, a small dappled gray pony stood in the night, its breath rising in soft clouds against the cold air. The pony's ears flicked forward, its dark eyes locked on the window, watching the boy inside. Her name was Luna, and she had been Noah's closest companion since his first steps. Unlike most children who grew up with dogs or cats, Noah had bonded with Luna, the gentle rescue pony his grandfather had gifted him when he was 5. From the moment they met, they were inseparable. She was more than a pet, she was his protector, his confidant, his silent guardian. Yet now she stood outside, unable to reach him. Emma glanced up from her son and caught sight of Luna standing just outside the hospital's garden, beyond the glass wall. The sight made her heart ache. She knew Luna had been restless since Noah was admitted, refusing to eat properly, pacing in her stable. It was as if she understood that something was wrong. "She's been waiting there all night," Daniel murmured, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Emma swallowed hard. "She knows," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "She feels what he feels." A soft knock on the door made them turn. Dr. Peterson, Noah's physician, entered with a heavy expression. He hesitated before speaking, his words carrying the weight of finality. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "Noah's heart is too weak. We've exhausted all options." Emma gasped, her body shaking, as she gripped Noah's hand even tighter. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. Daniel clenched his jaw, trying to be strong for his wife, but his hands were shaking. "Are you saying we should—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Peterson exhaled. "There's nothing more we can do medically. I suggest you spend these moments with him." A suffocating silence filled the room. Then from outside, a soft sound, a quiet whinny. Emma turned her head sharply, her eyes locking onto Luna, who was now pressing her head against the glass, her breath fogging up the window. The pony let out a low, desperate call, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Noah's monitor let out a weak, erratic beep, and for the first time in hours, his fingers twitched. Emma gasped. "Did you see that?" Daniel's eyes widened as he looked from Noah to Luna. Something was happening. Outside, Luna stomped her hoof and whinnied again, louder this time. The air in the room seemed to shift, and then, in the stillness of the night, Noah's fingers curled slightly around Emma's hand. For the first time in days, Emma felt hope flicker inside her chest. She clutched Noah's small hand, her heart pounding. The movement was faint, barely there, but it was something, a sign. Outside, Luna let out another whinny, her body pressing against the glass as if she could break through the barrier separating her from Noah. Her breath left a misty imprint on the window, and her dark, intelligent eyes held a sense of urgency that sent chills down Emma's spine. Daniel stood frozen, staring between Luna and their son, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just witnessed. "That wasn't a coincidence," he murmured. Dr. Peterson frowned, clearly hesitant to entertain anything outside the realm of science. "It's possible his body is reacting to stimuli," he offered. "But I'll admit this is unusual." Unusual didn't even begin to describe it. Emma's grip tightened around Noah's frail fingers, her pulse racing. "Luna's been here every night," she whispered, turning to Dr. Peterson. "She knows something. She feels something. What if she can help?" The doctor gave her a measured look. "Emma, I understand that this is difficult, but let her in." The words escaped Emma's lips before she could second-guess them. Dr. Peterson blinked. "Excuse me?" "Let her in," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "Just outside. Just close enough for Noah to know she's here." Daniel turned to her, concern creasing his brow. "Emma, I don't think they'll let a pony." Then we bring him to her, Emma countered. Desperation burned in her eyes. If we're out of time, then I won't let him leave this world without knowing she's there. The room fell into silence. Dr. Peterson exhaled, rubbing his forehead. We can't move him outside, not in his condition. He hesitated, then finally sighed. But I can authorize bringing his bed closer to the glass doors. That's as much as I can allow. Emma's breath caught. That's enough. Daniel, still processing everything, ran a hand through his hair before nodding. If there's even the slightest chance it helps, we do it. Dr. Peterson gave a single nod, then turned to the nurse's station. Within minutes, a team arrived to carefully wheel Noah's hospital bed toward the large sliding doors that led to the hospital garden. Emma never let go of his hand. As they reached the glass, Luna whinnied loudly, tossing her head, her hooves shifting anxiously against the ground. Emma saw the way her ears flicked toward Noah, the way she stood perfectly still the moment his bed came to a stop. It was as if she knew. Daniel moved to the control panel and pressed the button to slide the doors open just enough for Noah to feel the crisp night air. Luna took a step forward. Emma held her breath. Then, for the first time in days, Noah's eyes fluttered open. The cold night air drifted through the slightly open doors, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. The hospital garden, dimly lit by pathway lamps, stretched beyond the glass, and in the middle of it stood Luna, completely still. Her dark eyes locked onto Noah, her breath steady and slow. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't imagining it. Noah had moved. His fingers, weak and trembling, twitched slightly in her grasp. But it was his eyes, his barely opened, exhausted eyes, that stole the breath from her lungs. "Noah?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The boy's eyelids fluttered, his lashes barely lifting as his gaze flickered toward the open doors, toward Luna. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath, his grip tightening on the railing of Noah's hospital bed. Dr. Peterson, who had been standing just behind them, took a hesitant step closer, his usual professional detachment momentarily wavering. Luna took another measured step forward, her ears twitching, listening intently. Then, she did something that no one expected. She lowered her head, pressing her muzzle gently against the edge of the open door, as if she were reaching for Noah. Emma gasped, covering her mouth with her free hand. Tears welled in her eyes. Noah's lips parted slightly, and though no sound came out, his fingers curled, just barely, but enough to squeeze Emma's hand. "He's responding," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. Dr. Peterson immediately moved to check Noah's vitals. The monitors, which had been slow and irregular for hours, now showed a steadier rhythm. It was small, it was weak, but it was there. Emma turned her gaze back to Luna, and something deep inside her told her that this pony, this creature who had never left Noah's side, was the reason for this miracle. Luna let out a soft exhale, her breath warm against the night air, and then she nickered, a low, soothing sound, the kind Noah had always loved when he rode her through the fields near their home. And then, ever so faintly, Noah smiled. Emma sobbed, her tears falling freely, and Daniel turned away for a moment, rubbing at his eyes. Dr. Peterson stepped back, looking at the monitors with an expression of disbelief and wonder. This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "But whatever is happening, it's real." Emma barely heard him. She was too focused on her son, watching the impossible unfold before her. Luna stepped forward again, her body now inches from the open door, standing as still as a statue, waiting, watching, protecting. And Noah, still weak, still fragile, continued to look at her, holding on to that connection, as if it was the only thing tethering him to life. For the first time in days, hope filled the air. The room felt different now, not as heavy, not as hopeless. The sound of the heart monitor, once a slow, erratic beep, had found a steadier rhythm. It was still weak, but it was stronger than before. Emma wiped at her damp cheeks, her breath shaky. She could barely process what was happening. Just minutes ago, they were preparing for the worst, and now Noah had moved. Now, he was smiling. Daniel stepped closer, his hands resting on the rail of Noah's bed as he stared down at his son. "He's really here," he whispered, as if saying it out loud might shatter the fragile moment. Outside, Luna remained perfectly still, her soft breath visible in the cold night air. She hadn't moved away, hadn't turned her head or lost focus. She was waiting, watching, holding on. Dr. Peterson was quiet as he double-checked Noah's vitals, his brows furrowed. Emma knew he was searching for a logical explanation, something scientific to explain why Noah's condition had suddenly shifted. But there was nothing logical about this. "Noah, sweetheart," Emma whispered, squeezing his hand. "Can you hear me?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so faintly that it was almost impossible to hear, Noah murmured one word. "Luna." Emma gasped, her free hand flying to her chest as fresh tears welled in her eyes. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his fingers gripping the side of the bed so tightly his knuckles turned white. Dr. Peterson looked stunned. He spoke. Emma nodded frantically, brushing Noah's hair from his damp forehead. Yes, he did," she choked out. "He's coming back to us." Outside, Luna shifted, her ears flicking forward at the sound of Noah's voice. She let out another low nicker, the sound soft and full of warmth, and Noah's lips twitched into a weak but unmistakable smile. Dr. Peterson exhaled, his professional demeanor cracking slightly as he exchanged a look with the nurses behind him. "I don't understand it," he admitted, shaking his head, "but I can't deny what I'm seeing." Emma didn't need science. She didn't need an explanation. All she needed was the proof before her, her son who had been slipping away, now holding on. Daniel turned to Dr. Peterson, his voice filled with something that had been missing for weeks, hope. "What now?" Dr. Peterson hesitated. "We'll monitor him closely. This could be temporary, but I've never seen a turnaround like this before. If his body is responding, we may have more time than we thought." Emma let out a broken, relieved sob, pressing her forehead against Noah's small hand. She wasn't going to lose him. Not yet. Outside, Luna let out one last gentle whinny, and for the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to believe in miracles. The atmosphere inside room 304 had shifted. What had once been a space of quiet grief and fading hope was now filled with something fragile yet powerful. A chance. Noah's breathing remained weak, but his heart monitor showed small but steady improvements. His fingers, which had been limp for days, twitched ever so slightly, as if trying to reach for something unseen. For her. Outside, Luna stood unmoving, her soft gray coat reflecting the glow of the hospital's outdoor lights. She had been waiting for him to return to her. Emma ran her fingers gently through Noah's damp hair, her heart pounding at what had just happened. He had spoken. He had called out to Luna. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, his own expression a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and hope. "He's fighting," he whispered. Dr. Peterson, standing at the foot of the bed, looked down at his clipboard. His face was unreadable. "Noah is stable, for now," he admitted, flipping through the latest scans. "This is highly unusual. His heart is still weak, but it's holding on much better than expected." Emma wasn't interested in medical explanations. She only cared about what she could see, the color slowly returning to her son's face, the slight movement in his hands, the way he had responded to Luna. "Can we bring him outside?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice firm. Emma turned to him in shock. "Daniel, he just started showing signs of improvement." Daniel shook his head. "I know, but what if Luna is the reason he's improving?" He looked at Dr. Peterson. "You said it yourself. This doesn't make sense. What if he needs to be closer to her?" Dr. Peterson frowned. "That's unconventional. His immune system is weak and the risk of infection." "Please," Emma cut in, her voice cracking. "We're running out of options. If there's even the smallest chance that it helps, shouldn't we try?" Silence stretched between them. Dr. Peterson let out a slow breath, glancing toward the open sliding doors. Outside, Luna remained still, waiting. "I can allow it under one condition," he finally said. "We don't take him all the way outside, but we can move him to the covered outdoor terrace, just beyond the doors. That way he's still protected, but Luna can be near him." Emma nodded furiously, wiping at her tears. Daniel exhaled in relief. "That's all we need." Within minutes, a team of nurses arrived to carefully adjust Noah's hospital bed, ensuring his IVs and monitors remained stable. They slowly wheeled him toward the terrace, a small open space just beyond the glass doors. Emma walked beside him, never letting go of his hand. As they reached the terrace, Luna took a single step forward, her large eyes locked onto Noah. And then, for the second time that night, Noah's lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Luna," Emma's breath caught, Luna let out a soft, gentle nicker, the sound carrying through the still night, and then Noah's hand moved, weak, slow, but unmistakable. He was reaching for her. Emma held her breath, her fingers tightening around Noah's frail hand as she watched him stretch his trembling fingers toward Luna. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a motion that hadn't existed just hours ago. Daniel let out a sharp exhale, his hands gripping the edge of the hospital bed. He saw it too. Luna stepped closer, her hooves barely making a sound against the stone pavement. She moved with the kind of care only an animal with deep understanding could. Then she did something that made Emma's breath hitch. Luna lowered her head and pressed her muzzle ever so gently against Noah's outstretched fingers. A barely there touch. A connection so fragile, yet so unbreakable. And at that moment, the monitors attached to Noah's frail body let out a sudden, stronger beep. Dr. Peterson, who had been standing near the entrance, rushed forward, his eyes fixed on the vitals screen. His heart rate just improved, he murmured, disbelief lacing his voice. Emma could barely hear him over the pounding of her own heart. Noah's fingers curled slightly against Luna's muzzle, a movement so small yet carrying the weight of a miracle. Daniel let out a choked breath. He's touching her. Luna let out a soft nicker, her warm breath washing over Noah's fingers. Her ears flicked forward as she stood perfectly still, as if she knew this moment was bigger than both of them. Noah's eyelids fluttered. Then, ever so slightly, he turned his head. A slow, almost imperceptible movement, but he was responding. Dr. Peterson's gaze flickered between the monitors and the boy lying before him, his mind clearly battling between science and something far greater. "This isn't possible," he muttered, shaking his head. "Not like this." Emma ignored him, tears streaming down her face as she whispered her son's name. And for the first time in days, Noah's lips parted, and a single word escaped in a breathless whisper. "Mom." Emma sobbed. The sound broke through the night, raw and filled with years of love and fear and gratitude. Daniel pressed a shaking hand against his mouth, overcome with emotion. Noah's hand twitched again against Luna's muzzle, and though his body was still weak, his fingers tightened ever so slightly, holding on. Outside, the night remained still, but in the small space between a boy and his pony, something had shifted. Something had changed, and for the first time, hope didn't feel so impossible. The silence that followed Noah's whispered "Mom" felt heavier than the air itself. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had imagined this moment so many times, prayed for it, begged for it, but now that it was real, she felt as if she might collapse under the weight of it. Her trembling fingers brushed through Noah's soft, unkempt hair, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Noah's eyes barely opened, his lashes fluttering as he let out a weak, shallow breath. His fingers remained curled around Luna's muzzle, as if drawing strength from her touch. Daniel, his own emotions betraying him, wiped his face with the back of his hand, stepping closer. "Noah," he choked out, his voice raw with emotion. "You're awake, buddy." Dr. Peterson was no longer speaking. He stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold before him. His logical mind raced for an explanation, but he had none. Noah's vitals were improving, faint but undeniably better. Luna let out another soft nicker, nudging Noah's hand as gently as if she knew he needed the encouragement. Noah's lips parted again, his voice barely more than a breath. "Luna." Emma let out a sob, her free hand covering her mouth as she nodded. "She's here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "She never left you." Noah exhaled softly, his body still weak but no longer lifeless. His small fingers twitched again against Luna's velvety muzzle, and for a moment it was as if the world around them disappeared. Dr. Peterson finally cleared his throat, his voice unsteady as he spoke. "I don't know what's happening here," he admitted, "but Noah is responding to something." Daniel let out a breathy, almost disbelieving laugh. "He's responding to her." Emma nodded fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had no doubt. Luna stood completely still, her soft gray coat glowing under the dim hospital terrace lights. Her breathing remained steady, her big, intelligent eyes locked onto Noah with something unspoken, something more powerful than words. Dr. Peterson took another look at Noah's vitals, then shook his head in disbelief. "His heart rate is stabilizing," he murmured. "It's weak, but it's steady." Emma reached out, brushing Noah's cheek with trembling fingers. His skin, which had been so cold before, felt slightly warmer. Noah blinked slowly, his gaze still locked on Luna. His lips barely moved, but his next words sent a fresh wave of emotion crashing over them all. "She saved me." Emma sobbed again, clutching her son's fragile hand, as if she could keep him tethered to life forever. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his voice full of conviction. She did. And at that moment, there was no room for doubt. Luna hadn't just waited for Noah. She had brought him back. The cold night air felt different now, no longer heavy with sorrow, but filled with something unspoken, something that no one in the room, not even the doctors, could fully comprehend. Noah lay still, his body fragile, but his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His fingers, weak yet determined, remained curled against Luna's soft muzzle, as if she were the lifeline tethering him to this world. Emma stroked his hair, her touch gentle yet desperate, as if she feared letting go would take this moment away. Tears still clung to her lashes, her heart barely able to contain the emotions flooding through her. Daniel stood next to her, his hands resting on the edge of Noah's bed, his body still trembling from shock and relief. "You're really here, buddy," he whispered, his voice barely holding together. "You came back to us." Noah blinked slowly, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. His lips parted, and though his voice was faint, his words sent shivers through them all. "Luna called me." Emma sucked in a breath, her chest tightening. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she whispered. Noah's tired eyes flickered toward her, but then he looked past her, past everything, to the pony standing just beyond the glass doors. His fingers twitched against Luna's muzzle. "I was lost," he murmured. "It was dark. I couldn't find the way back." A tear slid down Emma's cheek as she leaned in closer. Noah's breath hitched, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But then, I heard her, Luna." Daniel exchanged a stunned glance with Emma, his throat tightening. Noah let out a slow, weak breath. "She didn't let me go." Outside, Luna remained unmoving, but her deep, knowing eyes never left Noah. She nickered softly, her warm breath visible in the crisp air. Dr. Peterson, standing off to the side, looked at the monitors again, his brows furrowed. "There's no logical explanation for this," he muttered. "His heart should be failing, and yet—" His voice trailed off as he stared at the undeniable truth flashing on the screen. Noah's vitals, though still weak, were stabilizing on their own. Emma wiped her tears, looking back at her son. "You fought your way back to us," she whispered. Noah's fingers moved slightly against Luna's muzzle. "She brought me back." Silence filled the terrace, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Dr. Peterson let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know what just happened here," he admitted. "But if this keeps up, there's a chance Noah might recover." Emma let out a sob of relief, pressing a kiss to Noah's forehead. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes misty. Luna let out another soft whinny, and for the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to believe in miracles. The cold night air wrapped around them, but no one seemed to notice. All eyes were on Noah and Luna, locked in a silent exchange that defied logic, time, and understanding. Noah's fingers trembled but stayed against Luna's soft muzzle, the warmth of her breath mixing with the coolness of his fragile skin. His body was still weak, his frame thin, but something had shifted. His presence, his awareness. He was here, truly here. Emma couldn't stop staring at her son, her tears now falling freely down her cheeks. Just hours ago, she had been preparing to say goodbye. Now he was speaking, moving, fighting. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "Noah," he whispered, kneeling beside him. "How do you feel, buddy?" Noah blinked slowly, his exhaustion evident, but his lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "Tired," he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. Emma let out a laugh, choked with relief, full of gratitude. "That's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "You just rest, okay? We're here. Luna's here." At the sound of her name, Luna nudged Noah's hand gently, a soft whinny escaping her lips. Dr. Peterson, who had been standing nearby, remained silent, watching everything unfold with undeniable disbelief. He kept looking back at the monitors, as if expecting to see some error, some reason why Noah's vitals had miraculously steadied. Finally, he let out a breath. "His heart rate is stronger than it's been all week," he admitted, shaking his head. I can't explain it." Emma turned to him, her eyes fierce and determined. You don't have to explain it. Just believe it. Dr. Peterson didn't argue. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. Noah let out a small breath, his eyelids fluttering as exhaustion began to pull at him again. But before sleep could take him, he whispered, Luna. Emma leaned in. What is it, sweetheart? Noah's fingers barely moved against the pony's muzzle, but his expression softened, a peacefulness settling over him. She's tired. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Luna stood steady, but her breathing was heavier now, as if something unseen was weighing her down. Daniel frowned, glancing at the pony. She's been here all night, he murmured. Dr. Peterson studied Luna, his expression shifting slightly. Animals can sense things we don't understand, he said quietly, and sometimes they give more than we realize. Emma's stomach twisted. She turned to Luna, her heart squeezing painfully in her chest. Did you bring him back to us, at a cost? She whispered, barely able to say the words. Luna let out a deep sigh, her eyes half-lidded, as if she had done everything she could, and now she was finally feeling the weight of it all. The terrace was silent, save for the soft beeping of Noah's monitors and the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze. But despite the calm, a new kind of fear settled into Emma's chest. Luna was exhausted. Her steady stance had changed. Her legs trembled slightly, and her breaths, once even and controlled, were now heavier, slower. Emma exchanged a worried glance with Daniel, who had noticed it too. His jaw tightened. Something's wrong, he murmured. Noah, still barely holding on to wakefulness, seemed to sense it before anyone else. His fingers twitched weakly against Luna's muzzle, and though his voice was a whisper, his words were clear. She's tired, Mom. Emma's heart clenched. Dr. Peterson, still watching everything unfold with a mixture of fascination and concern, stepped forward carefully. She could just be exhausted from standing all night, he reasoned, but even he didn't sound convinced. Luna blinked slowly, her soft gray coat gleaming under the hospital lights. She let out a deep sigh, pressing her muzzle more firmly against Noah's hand, as if to offer him one last reassurance. Noah let out a breathy giggle, small, weak, but real. She's okay, he murmured, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion. She told me she is. Emma's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But the way Luna lowered her head just slightly, as if struggling to hold it up, sent a sharp pang of fear through her chest. Daniel reached out, running a hand gently along Luna's neck. You've done enough, girl, he whispered. You brought him back. Luna exhaled again, her ears flicking at the sound of his voice, but she didn't step away. She remained right there, as if she had made a promise she refused to break. Dr. Peterson checked Noah's vitals again, shaking his head in disbelief. His heart rate is still stable, he murmured, then looked at the pony. It's as if she gave him something we don't understand. Emma swallowed hard, her hand tightening around Noah's. She's always protected him, she whispered, since the day they met. Noah's grip around Luna's muzzle loosened slightly, his small body finally giving in to sleep. But even as he drifted off, his lips curled into the smallest, softest smile. He was at peace. Luna let out one last deep exhale, her breath warm against Noah's fingers. Then, for the first time all night, she slowly stepped back, her legs shaky but determined. Emma and Daniel watched, their hearts pounding. Luna turned her head toward them, her large, soulful eyes locking onto Emma's for a moment. And in that look, Emma swore she saw something unspoken, something final. Then, without a sound, Luna slowly walked away from the terrace, disappearing into the shadows of the night. And as Noah slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Emma couldn't help but wonder, had Luna just given him a second chance at life at the cost of her own? The night air felt strangely still as Luna disappeared beyond the terrace, her soft gray form fading into the darkness. Emma's heart pounded, a deep unease settling into her chest. Noah had finally fallen into a deep, restful sleep, his breathing steady, his small hands still curled as if Luna's muzzle were still there. The warmth had returned to his face, the pale, lifeless look he had worn for days replaced by something soft, something alive. But Luna was gone. Daniel stepped forward, his eyes scanning the hospital's outdoor garden. She just left? He murmured, confusion lacing his voice. Emma wiped at her damp cheeks, swallowing the lump in her throat. She's never done that before, she whispered. Not with Noah. Dr. Peterson, still standing by the monitors, sighed and shook his head. I don't know what just happened here, but Noah is stable. His vitals are better than I've seen in days. Emma wanted to be relieved. She should be relieved. But her gaze kept flickering toward the place where Luna had stood just moments ago, offering her silent strength, refusing to leave Noah's side. And now she was gone. A sharp knock at the terrace door made everyone turn. A young nurse, her cheeks flushed from running, stepped forward hesitantly. I don't mean to interrupt, she said, breathless. But I thought you should know. The pony. Emma's stomach twisted. Luna? The nurse nodded quickly. Yes, she was standing near the far end of the garden, but a moment ago, she collapsed. Emma felt the world tilt. No, she whispered, already moving toward the doors. Daniel was right behind her. Dr. Peterson exhaled, setting his clipboard down. I'll come too, he muttered. They rushed through the quiet hospital corridors, following the nurse toward the back garden. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs, dread pooling in her stomach with every step. When they reached the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. Luna lay stretched out on the cool grass, her sides rising and falling slowly, too slowly. Emma fell to her knees beside her, her fingers immediately running through Luna's soft mane. Luna, no, please, she whispered. Daniel crouched beside her, his face pale. Is she? Dr. Peterson knelt down, pressing gentle fingers against Luna's neck, searching for something. A pulse, a sign, a miracle. After a moment, he exhaled. She's alive, he said, but his expression was grim, but weak, very weak. Emma let out a choked sob, brushing her hands gently over Luna's forehead. She gave everything, she whispered. Dr. Peterson, still checking her vitals, shook his head. I don't understand it. There's nothing physically wrong with her, he hesitated. It's almost as if she gave something away. Emma bit back a sob, her fingers tightening in Luna's mane. Daniel swallowed hard. She saved him. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face, but at what cost? Luna's eyes opened just slightly, her soft, familiar gaze meeting Emma's for a brief, fleeting moment. And in that look, Emma understood everything. Luna had done what she had come to do. She had given Noah life, and now she was fading. Emma leaned forward, pressing her forehead to Luna's, just as Noah had done so many times before. Stay, she whispered. Please, stay. Luna let out one last soft exhale, and then her eyes drifted closed. Daniel stood behind her, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He hated this helplessness. Dr. Peterson sighed heavily, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. His voice was soft but filled with the weight of truth. She's fought as hard as she could. Emma choked back a sob, shaking her head. She wasn't ready, but Noah understood. He wasn't afraid. Mom, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emma turned to him, her heart breaking all over again. She's ready, Noah said softly. She's telling me it's okay. Emma shook her head fiercely. No, sweetheart, she just needs time. She waited for me, Noah interrupted, his small voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. She stayed until she knew I'd be okay. But now she's tired. Emma let out a quiet sob, clinging to Luna, unwilling to accept what she already knew in her heart. Luna exhaled softly, her ears twitching slightly at Noah's voice. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head one last time. Her deep, soulful eyes locked onto Noah's, and in them he saw everything. Her love, her devotion, her quiet, unspoken goodbye. Noah reached out with all the strength he had left, his trembling fingers barely grazing her muzzle. It's okay, Luna, he whispered. You don't have to stay anymore. Luna let out one final breath, warm and soft against his hand. And then she stilled. The garden fell silent. Emma let out a choked cry, pressing her forehead against Luna's, whispering words of love and gratitude through her tears. Daniel turned away, rubbing his face as his shoulders shook. Dr. Peterson lowered his head, his expression unreadable, as if even he couldn't believe what had just happened. But Noah just smiled through his tears. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Luna was gone, but she had never truly left. 1 month later, Noah, now stronger, stood between Emma and Daniel as they placed a small wooden plaque beneath Luna's favorite tree. It read, Luna, the light that never faded. Emma traced the letters with her fingers, her heart aching and full at the same time. She'll always be with us, she whispered. Noah smiled, looking toward the sky. She already is. And as the wind swept through the open fields, a warmth surrounded them, Maybe it was just the morning sun, or maybe it was something more. This story isn't just about loss, it's about love, sacrifice, and the quiet way some souls never truly leave us. Love doesn't fade, it transforms. The ones we cherish remain with us, even when we can no longer see them. Some bonds defy explanation, whether between people or animals, proving that love is the strongest force of all. We should honor those who gave us everything by carrying their love forward, cherishing every moment, and knowing that they continue to live on in our hearts. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had an animal or a loved one who changed your life? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story, because love never truly dies.